Hello, good evening, and welcome to the Comics Experience Graphic Novel of the Month Club. This is our selection for March for the adult new book, and we've got a really great piece of science fiction for you tonight. A little bit of social commentary as well. The book is Eve, and we are very honored to have Victor LaVALLE, the author, here with us. Hello, sir. How are you? Oh, you're still muted. Hold on, half a second. There you go. Now you should be able to talk.
I'm doing well, and I'm real happy to be here. I appreciate Eve for the month.
Yeah, we liked it a lot. I mean, we thought it was a very swell book, and it's always nice to have a book like this that particularly with a character of color, and that's thoughtful, and that it's moving things forward. We really liked the book a lot.
Thank you. I was all those reasons, all those things you're saying about it were exactly the kind of energy that I wanted to bring to the story. Just for a girl like Eve to be the one who gets to save the world, perhaps.
Yeah.
And who is the center of the story, and is at heart like an innocent, that. Really, on a certain level, her superpower is just kind of her hopefulness.
Yeah.
That all of that was kind of what I wanted to sort of put into the book. So I'm happy that it came through.
Yeah. No, it very much did. So I always ask the first question, the same first question to everybody who's a guest here. I really like it. Your answer is probably going to be a little different than most people, just because of your history and your past. But the first question is this: is why comics? You can tell stories in any number of ways, and in fact, you're a novelist primarily. You've written 7 novels, many of which have been won awards, the major awards. And so why comics?
Comics was my first love. Comics was how I learned to read and how I learned to love stories. For me, like the first, I guess, independent reading experience was, so I grew up in Queens, New York. Around our way, we had a corner store called the Gina Rose Candy Shop. It was owned by 2 sisters, Gina and Rose. That's where they got the name. And they had a spinner rack, old school spinner rack in there. And part of why they were so beloved in the neighborhood, you come in at the end of school, whatever, maybe you spend a quarter on a quarter water, you buy some chips. And then if you did that, they really didn't care if you just stood there with your buddies and read comics for nothing.
Oh, nice.
It was really, and I think for them, it was just a sense of like a little bit of a community space. The comics weren't that expensive. I don't ever remember buying one, but I do remember reading all of them. And Gina and Rose were like true like saints of the block, because for a bunch of the friends growing up, that was our first chance to like decide what we wanted to read.
Yeah.
So that's why comic, because I love them dearly.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. That's great. I grew up in Brooklyn, and my first comics were also from the bodega. Nice. Though they made us buy them. They didn't just let us read them. They were quite grumpy about if you didn't give them the 75 cents or whatever it was.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess that only makes me understand even more how special Gina and Rose were.
Yeah. Absolutely. What's the first comics you remember reading? Because obviously, I'm sure you've read many, but what was the ones that stuck with you? Well,
I remember. So I don't know if this necessarily has to do with anything, but for a short period of time, for about a year, I lived with an auntie, with my grandmother's sister in Trinidad. And for whatever reason, the Tintin comics were really popular in Trinidad. And so those were just pouring over those books, and the Asterix comics too, for whatever reason, were super popular there. But Tintin in particular, they were so beautiful, so meticulously drawn. Even when I didn't understand the stories, I loved just looking at those images and seeing Petey jumping around and all just beautiful,
Yeah.
And so Tintin, and then the other thing was X-Men is probably, and Spider-Man, maybe because Spider-Man is a Queens kid.
Right.
I a deep love for Spider-Man as a result. And then the X-Men were, I guess, I mean, by now it's a cliche to talk about the X-Men as, the outsider, speaking to the sort of the cast outs and all the rest. But I did love them dearly for that too.
Yeah. Yeah. Was this the new X-Men, the international X-Men, not the
Yes,
original five? Yeah.
that's right. This would be God Loves, Man Kills era.
Oh wow. Okay. Yeah.
Would be, I would say, I'm sure I read a few here and there on the spinner rack, but when I actually could identify characters and follow storylines and really care about them, the first one I remember, I mean, I think a lot of people from that era, that's what they're going to remember.
Sure.
Is God Loves, Man Kills.
Sure. Yeah. No, that was a very deep story. Yeah.
For sure. But that was part of the profound aspect. So like Tintin, beautifully drawn. I don't know that they are the most profound comics in the world. They're just fun adventures, right? Mm-hmm. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's wonderful.
Absolutely.
And then Spider-Man 2, I would say, especially that era, not always the deepest. They're just great adventures, except for maybe something like Kraven's Last Hunt or something like that, the occasional standout. Yeah. But X-Men, like, at least God Loves, Man Kills, and then sort of from there forward, I feel like Claremont was really taking on some heavy stuff, Mutant Massacre and all this kind of, it was like not lighthearted business. And I appreciated learning that comics could do that too. Before moving on to whoever else, whatever comics that might be like 8-Ball, things like that. That would, like, later on, where I was like, oh, this can really do a lot of stuff.
Right.
But as a kid, 10, 11, 12, that still felt like a sort of a step up for me in my thinking and my maturity.
Yeah, no, and I feel like X-Men at that time too was very very transgressive and very just dealing with things that you didn't see those kinds of themes developed anywhere else.
No. Like not even glancingly tackled.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't want everything. I want some things to just be, here's the cosmic cube and let's battle against eternity for it. I want that too.
Yeah.
But I don't only want that.
Yeah. When did you know you wanted to be a writer?
I would say relatively young, probably. So I would say I grew up in a somewhat chaotic household, and what I learned was that if you hold up a book in front of you, people will kind of leave you alone.
Right.
You become invisible on a certain level, and so I became a reader in part to sort of disappear.
Yeah.
And go into another, go away from this household.
Yeah.
And then I gravitated more toward horror. So I was reading people like Lovecraft, Stephen King, Clyde Barker, Shirley Jackson, as I got older. But as I read them, particularly Stephen King, I would say, because he was so good at finding that middle ground between like stories about adults and like hard things, but still finding a way to have a tone that could make a 10, 12-year-old kid feel like he understood things. The language is clear and direct. It's not simplistic, but it is clear and direct.
Sure.
And so I began writing by copying Stephen King stories.
Nice.
I think an age-old way of beginning to write.
Yeah.
And at that stage, I don't know that I thought I wanted to be a writer, but I did know I enjoyed writing, and then I didn't really find anything else I enjoyed anywhere near as much.
Yeah. What was the reaction to your early stories from the adults in your life?
Well, I was lucky in a way because my mother and my grandmother couldn't give a damn at all about it, and in a way that was kind of freeing. So like my mom was a secretary, she was working real hard. My grandmother was taking care of me and my sister. There was never a day when I said like, hey, would you read my story about roaches that eat a man? Like it's just never a time where I did that. And I never would have thought they would care about it. And that was actually kind of sort of like with the book, it was kind of freeing.
To
not worry about that. And so it was really not until maybe high school that I started to share sometimes, like in a if there was a creative writing part of a class or something like that. And my teachers, almost to a person, would always say like, "This is gruesome, but it's fun.
Yeah.
You should keep going." And I think for me, rather than necessarily feeling like any particular encouragement, the gift was I just never got any discouragement.
Mm-hmm.
And so I never, like, nobody told me it was stupid to do this. Nobody said, like, why don't you try to write something more serious?
Right.
And in that way, I just got to play in every direction I wanted to play.
Yeah.
You know? And it wasn't until maybe college that I would say college, freshman or sophomore year, my first writing workshop, where a fellow student, not even the professor, basically wrote at the end of my story, just one like word, and it just was ooh, and just shamed me like so powerfully. And it was the beginning of me thinking like, oh, I should be more serious about this. I shouldn't be writing monster stories and horror stories.
Yeah.
It's serious. And then, to my great sadness, I kind of put away the stuff I really wanted to write. And I thought like, oh no, I have to write like realistic stories about sad things, because that's
Right.
literature.
Yeah.
You know, and it took a long time for me to shake that off, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. Now your day job, you're a professor yourself, and you teach writing, yes?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I never write ooh at the end of any of my students' stories.
Broadly, how do you see genre fiction as a professor?
Well, I would say I welcome it thoroughly,
Yeah.
and as a result, I find the students who are working in that sort of realm will definitely gravitate to my class because they know it's kind of a safe space for it.
Sure.
But it's not a guaranteed. It's not a guarantee, you know. Like there are lots of writers, professors who write literary realism, and it's not that they don't want to. I wouldn't say that it's that they dismiss genres of various kinds, but that they're it's like anything. They're not well read in it, so they don't know how to help people get better at it. Right? They might not even say it that way, but that's the way I would say it. Probably, to be generous.
Yeah.
But here or there, so I mean, this is not an advertisement. I don't work at Sarah Lawrence, but like I've been kind of happy. Sarah Lawrence College in New York has now has an MFA with a concentration in speculative fiction.
Yeah.
And I love it being sort of clearly stated like that, so that people writing sci-fi, horror, fantasy can know like this is a door that it's not that you can kick it open. It's open for you.
Yeah.
But I think that that's relatively rare, especially if you're talking at like the MFA level.
Yeah.
And I know, talking to students, it can be a little bit of a work to sometimes say like, this might also not be the best place for you to grow. Like there's the Clarion writing workshops. There's any number of places. I think the Horror Writers Association does like horror writing workshops,
right.
And that there are other places and other ways to sort of find community and to be treated with the dignity that any writer should have.
Yeah.
That said, I do think any situation, it's possible to say I'm going to get something out of this, regardless of whether or not the other person is willing to give me something.
Right.
And so that was my experience when I did my MFA, was that I said to myself, every class, no matter what, I got to get something out of this.
Yeah.
And that wasn't like magic. It was because I had failed out of my undergrad and done really badly. And so my feeling was like, if I don't make this work, I'm just never going to make anything work.
Right, right.
And so my energy in the class, even the classes where professors were dismissive of what I was doing, I was sort of like, okay, but they did teach me how to do an opening sentence, a good opening sentence. I never wrote one according to them, but I still learned what one might be. You know, and I'm going to take that. I'm going to take that.
Yeah, because it seems to me that in academia, it's only really recently that non-literary work is considered acceptable.
Yes, I would say that's right, and I think it's, academia always sort of trails the whatever is the modern culture,
Sure.
because they have to study the thing before they can decide if it's worth it,
Right.
right? But as more and more people, Colson Whitehead has won the Pulitzer Prize for essentially a speculative novel. You have all these various writers doing these kind of amazing, what would in any other earlier decade clearly be called a science fiction novel, a fantasy novel, a horror novel. But now these things are blended so that something could win the National Book Award and the World Fantasy Award, potentially.
Mm-hmm.
And now people wouldn't bat an eye in the way they would 10, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like that's a kind of progress, at least
Sure.
I like, certainly.
Yeah, my primary knowledge is on the comic side of the world,
Yes.
And certainly, it's really the last decade that there are college level comics classes.
Yes.
I mean, there have been for longer than that, but it was always a kind of a fringe thing, and now there's literally school programs that's what they do. And it's fascinating to me how that changes the work and it changes the world as well.
That's right, and the conversation about it. My buddy teaches at the University of Oregon, and they've got specifically like a comic studies like a line or like program. And when he was getting the job, part of the reason he got the job was because he writes fiction and he does graphic novels, and they wanted somebody who could teach students in both worlds.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I agree. Like, I feel like, I'm sure there are some people who would say like comics should stay out of academia because academia poisons everything. And I can't say I disagree entirely. But I do like the idea of being able to work with people who have, that kind of long history to be able to say, this thing you love, it's actually in this tradition of things.
Yeah.
And let's talk about how or why these things build on each other.
Yeah.
So that that person can make the next thing in that chain.
Sure. Sure. So I'll admit that I'm relatively ignorant about your novels, other than what I've read on Wikipedia. I apologize. But if I was reading it correctly, it seems like all of your novels are genre work. Is that right?
The last 5 have been. The first 2 books were pure literary realism. The first one was a book of stories about me growing up in Queens with kind of boys who weren't sort of supervised. And then the second novel was about a person very much based on me and my family who kind of comes home from college because he's failed out and he's not doing very well and everything breaks down between him and his family. And essentially when I was writing those things, I had essentially ended all my life story unless I was going to next write a novel about a guy who goes to an MFA program. And I really did not want to write that book.
Right.
And so it was a real like fork in the road moment where I realized I could go down this path of continuing to do this literary realism, but in truth, like it wasn't making me very happy, and I was getting pretty bored with myself.
Yeah.
And then I said, "There's this other path, and this other path. To go down that path, I think I need to start writing about monsters because that's what I loved so much when I was young." And then that turned out to be the best path because the books I think got better. I think they got more interesting, like not so much about me exclusively. And if I could say, like the thing that was such a gift was my editor, who I've been with through all except my very first book. he said, like, if you leave behind whatever readership you've gained with the first two, you don't know that there'll be anyone who wants to read these others.
Right.
So why give up even just the nominal readership that you have? And I said, I got to do it anyway. And to my great pleasure and to his great relief, it turned out there were a lot more people who wanted to read the more fantastical, speculative stuff that I was writing than wanted to read more about me being miserable.
Do you think now in hindsight that you did have some of your audience move from one to the other, or did you have to rebuild from scratch?
I would say a good bit of that audience came over. I would say that other truth is it wasn't that big an audience. Yeah. You know what I mean? So it wasn't that many people to shift.
Yeah. Sure.
And maybe in a way, what also was like what happened was the books were also like a slow progression into the speculative. So even those folks who were here on the realist side, it wasn't like they immediately had to buy into horned monsters that are possessing children or something like that.
Right.
You know, it began with stuff that was a little closer, like realist for a while, and then it becomes wild. And I think in a way, a lot of them kind of said, well, I still enjoy the writing and I still like the characters, so I'll stick around. And then really the bigger shift was there was many more people who were like, well, now this sounds interesting, you know, as opposed to maybe the other stuff. It was interesting to me, but, you know.
Yeah, because unfortunately, one of the I don't know if it's a sad secret or if it's not a secret at all, but like most books don't sell. You know,
they do not sell.
They just don't. I mean, it doesn't really matter what it is. Most don't, and you know, it strikes me that unless you get really lucky to get sort of recognized by specific literary magazines or people, that it's really difficult. It's more difficult probably to have a career as doing literary realism. Would you agree with that, or am I off base on that?
No, I don't think you're wrong. I think that the path or whatever for like literary realism is like, let's say, just getting a book published across the board, whether you're talking about prose, comics, poetry, it's already a miracle to get the work out and done, right? But let's say in literary realism, you get the books published. The path is often from there is to sort of say like, well, maybe now I can get some teaching, right? And so in a way, sort of the path on literary realism can be one that relies on not necessarily like I have to sell a ton of books, but I sell enough books that I can convince a university that I have something to teach students. And then you enter into that path, right? That, you know, the relationship is mutually beneficial because by and large, as we were just saying, the university system still largely credits literary realism as the serious genre.
Right.
So it's also like we're hiring you because we respect the type of writing you do and because we think that's the type of writing our students should do. Right. And that's the kind of thing our academic side is interested in studying.
Yeah.
So there's a way that it becomes an ecosystem that sort of feeds each other.
Yeah.
As opposed to, I'm thinking about like the, I don't know, like Dashiell Hammett or Poe or Walter Mosley or something like that, where it's just like, you better publish another book, and just hope you can publish enough in your year to make rent.
Yeah.
Or publish enough that eventually maybe one of your books actually connects with readers.
Sure.
So you can actually like cover your rent for 6 months.
Yeah.
You know, that's another path. But so, yeah, I think literary realism probably, if you were to look at the sales of things, you know, the vast majority of every genre doesn't sell.
Absolutely.
Right? But most of the other genres can't say, well, I didn't sell that much, but I got a job that gives me health insurance.
Right.
And summer's off. You know, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
Stuff. And so I think that is potentially sometimes also the lure.
Yeah. the advantage to me that genre has, and I'm not positive how strong of an advantage it is, but the advantage that I see is that genre has, I think, more stores that are dedicated to that. There's a whole swath of horror, bookstores that specialize in horror or
Yes.
specialize in science fiction. There's more, I think, magazines that are not highfalutin, that are writing about genre work and exposing people to that genre work than maybe there are with literary stuff. Again, this is me from the outside because I own comic books. That's
Right.
what I do. But does that seem right to you?
I feel like that sounds right, and that feels almost like the mirror to the academia path, right? Like it's like there's that would be the other ecosystem that supports its writers, right, and does a great job of like the equivalent of the hand sell. You got to read this, and the idea that a person keeps coming back to that store because they trust the people at that store.
Exactly.
And those people at that store get to know them. And when they say, you got to read this, they believe it.
Yeah.
And they pick that thing up, right? And then they're introduced to someone great.
Yeah. And as you learn who the customers are and what they like, you start recognizing what not to recommend to them.
Exactly.
Like, oh, you're not going to like this one,
right.
But this is in your field, So yeah, no, it's an interesting thing. So you got on that academic path. It strikes me that as being a teacher is a lot of work.
It's a lot of work, yeah.
And especially if you're teaching something like writing, where you have to read everything that your students are giving to you, which again consumes a lot more time, I think, than just like a paper on archaeology or something.
Right. Well, I think, I would hope that all the papers, whether creative or academic, take time and need to be read, right? What I would say is I think the teaching is a heavy job, but at least generally speaking, it's still not a 40-hour-a-week job.
Yeah.
Right. So it's still like it's hard work, but there's harder work.
Right.
For sure, out in the world. And so the great thing is, and so that means like you're teaching a few classes a week, you're doing administrative work as part of the job, you're mentoring students, all those kinds of things are going on. So you're filling up a week, certainly. It's a full-time job, but there is still might be like one day a week where you can carve out is a writing day.
Right. That was where I was going with this. Is how do you write novels at the same time that you are juggling this other career?
Right. And so I would say in my case, like so my wife and I have two children, two sons, and I became more productive once she gave birth to our sons, which is not the usual way. But when I say more productive, all I mean is like before our kids, I had no routine. But once the kids came, I had to have a routine.
Interesting.
Because the kids didn't care about like, oh, I'm inspired right now. I need whatever. So what I started to learn was to find. I used to be able to find. It would be 2 hours a day, right? Like morning, evening, whatever it is. And all I have is that 2 hours, and I'm just going to work in those 2 hours. Nowadays, it's probably an hour because the kids are a little older. I have some other commitments outside of family and the teaching.
Right.
So even an hour, though, but the routine has become such that doing 1 hour a day, 3 to 5 days a week, I'll produce a novel in a year.
Yeah.
Whereas in the past, I used to believe, like before the kids, I used to think I need 42 straight hours in order to write this one chapter because I need to immerse myself. And now I'm just like, you got an hour.
Yeah.
You got to write that chapter. You got to begin that chapter this hour because in another hour, you're going to pass out because you're exhausted.
Yeah.
And that has been like the greatest gift, even as it hasn't always felt like a gift, for my productivity.
Yeah.
So whatever is coming, sometimes week to week, some weeks are more heavy. I don't get any work done. But generally speaking, it's like an hour. I can find an hour. I can find an hour. I can find an hour.
Yeah.
And I look up and I go, oh, I finished issue 3 of Eve. Okay. I finished the chapter of the next book. Okay. And I just know to myself, don't worry about it, but look, you're going to lift your head in a year. You're going to see how much you got done.
Yeah.
And that's been my method our oldest son is 11. So for the last 11 years, and I've produced so much more in that 11 years than I did in the previous 11.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. I like that. Are you a morning writer, an evening writer?
Usually it's actually more like midday so for me it's like I have like a morning class, and then I have administrative stuff in the afternoon, and then we pick up the kids, and then it's dinner with the kids, and then it's like that. So right in this sweet spot of maybe 11 to 12, like the lunch hour, so to speak.
Interesting. Yeah.
Is the time when I've trained myself at this point now, like just sit down, work wherever I am. I have the computer maybe, or I'm writing by hand, whatever it is.
Yeah.
In that 1 hour, I'm snacking on something while I'm working. Then I look up and I say, but you did your hour, so the rest of the day I don't feel resentful of the rest of my responsibilities. And I can look back, even, more than half the time, the thing I wrote for that hour is garbage.
Right.
Like I can, even as I'm reading, I say, oh, this is crap.
Yeah.
But I had to get that crap out.
Yeah.
To get to the good thing.
Sure.
And so that's my sort of mindset. So midday is my best time.
Yeah. Neat. That's interesting. Yeah. So let's get to comics in this.
Yes.
How did you make the jump to your first comic was Destroyer, and so where did that come from? Did you pitch that, or did they come to you and go, we read your novels, we think they're really great, we'd like you to write something?
Definitely that did not happen.
Okay.
Definitely not. What actually happened was, it's a little more roundabout. So there's a great classic horror writer, or continuing to be great horror writer, Clyde Barker.
Sure.
I wrote a piece for the radio for NPR. They were doing a thing like name the first book that scared you. It was like a Halloween thing, probably now 15 years ago, 10, 15 years ago. And I wrote up a thing on Clyde Barker's Books of Blood. And then in some roundabout way or another, he heard it because it was playing on NPR. And so, as a roundabout way to say it, so he has the Hellraiser comic, the Hellraiser universe. And he was publishing through Boom Studios an anthology of Hellraiser comics. He'd heard me say this thing about these flattering things about the book. Maybe he looked me up. He saw that I'd written some books. He told the editors at Boom, why don't you reach out to that guy, see if he has anything. He's not a comic guy, so maybe he'll come from a different angle, kind of thing. So they reached out. I pitched them a story that was not about Pinhead, which was already, I felt like, already 90% different from everybody else. And I knew, like I said, everybody's pitching Pinhead.
Yeah.
Do something else. So I pitched a different kind of demon sort of story. And they said, we don't have one of those. Sounds good. And so I pitched them a 12-page thing. They said, okay, let's do it. I wrote the script and all that stuff. And then just before they were going to start illustrating it, they called me up and they said, okay, look, you got 5 pages.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, all right, I'll figure it out. And I morphed it together. I'm not claiming it's great, but I got it done. And so I turned it in, and they said, hey, look, it was good working with you, and we also appreciated seeing that you could adjust to reality. If you ever have an idea, reach out to us.
Oh, nice.
And I said, okay. And then it was probably a year or so before I came up with the pitch for Destroyer. I wrote it out, sent it to them. They liked it. We started talking, and that was the beginning of that process.
Yeah.
And
Interesting.
so, yeah, so that was the kind of roundabout way to get there. And it was, and then I think what was good, I mean, it was a positive experience, and it was pretty positively received, the comic itself. Um, and so then that's when they said, like, if you ever have another one, let us know. And then that was when I pitched them Eve.
Yeah.
And so then that's how we got here.
Was there a struggle when you were writing that first Hellraiser script, in learning the difference in the language between prose and comics? Because structurally they're very different things.
Very different, yes.
Yeah.
Well, I will say so. In 2010, so this must have, so the whole Hellraiser thing anthology must have happened after 2010, because in 2010 I got this fellowship to move to Amsterdam for 5 months and learn how to learn screenwriting, essentially.
Nice.
My wife and I went there. That's where we our first son was conceived, and this school that was there called the Binger Film Lab. It's basically 5 days a week, 9 to 5, and you're learning screenwriting, but you're also learning essentially directing. You're learning like how to make pitches, how to do log lines, all this kind of stuff. And for me as a prose writer, and there was also a Dutch writer who was a part of it. For the two of us, it was a crash course in the difference between prose and visual storytelling. And because we would come in with these scripts where, like, it says like interior barn night, and then like a 2-page description of like the interior of the barn and the smell and the mood, and then 2 characters would say, "Nice to see you." "Yeah, good to see you too." End of scene. Right? And they just tore us to pieces.
Yeah.
And you're basically like, you're not doing visual storytelling.
Yeah.
You have to learn that. And so it was like really difficult and grueling to make the shift. But one of the many benefits of that time was when it came time to write the comic, I had been put through the ringer of visual storytelling, which again, and screenwriting is not the same as comic writing, certainly, but they're closer.
Yeah.
Right. I had at least had it pounded out of my brain that you need to be writing prose.
Yeah.
And that everything is interior. Instead, it was all about like, how can you make the interior exterior? How can you make a feeling into something someone can understand from seeing it? And so I still think, like, when I look even at the Hellraiser thing, I look at Destroyer, and I look at Eve, I can even look at it and I can see me learning even more the comic vocabulary. But I think if I had not gone through that experience in Amsterdam, they would not have, my script for the Hellraiser thing would not have been salvageable.
Yeah.
And then I would have never been able to do Destroyer or Eve.
Yeah.
So
yeah. So I'd love for you maybe to talk a little bit about sort of the difference in structure between prose and comics, because in comics, the unit is the page, and you have to think about things in terms of pages. This is different than in screenwriting, because in screenwriting there is no page; it's always just forward motion. But in prose, you don't write to a page count or a like, this has got to be 22 pages. It like,
right. Yeah, no, it's a real. They're just such different languages, And so, like, I will say, like, not so much the Hellraiser, because it was only 5 pages, so there was only so much. Even the issue of, like, is it page 1? Then the next reveal should be page 2. I mean, 2, is it going to be 4? Is it 6? How are you going to break those things down?
Right.
It wasn't until we were doing Destroyer together that the editors gave me we really like dug into it, particularly like probably at least the first 2 issues. where I gave in the script and it looked much more like a screenplay script, in the sense of like you say, it's a continuous moment. And then they sat me down, on the phone or whatever, and we were like, okay, look, right now the problem is the reveal keeps showing up like on the wrong page.
Right.
Like page 3 has the reveal, but they've turned it and they already see it because they're on page 2.
Right.
And then talking me through, like, you're doing good visual storytelling, right? Like the characters are doing interesting things. They're moving in interesting ways. But now you have to add in the next step of, but I need them to do that interesting thing on the turn.
Right. Exactly.
Which is it's such a specific way to tell the story. And then we would get into things like, but you can't, if every page is a turn like that, it starts to seem gimmicky. Like it's just like movie posters as opposed to real storytelling. So you also have to figure out how to parse it out.
Yeah.
So that you give them something, then you lull them into thinking, oh, it's just story, and then you give them another thing, and so the editors at Boom were really instrumental in helping me move from visual storytelling to then comic book visual storytelling.
Yeah.
And I hope we did a good job with Destroyer, and then with Eve, I think we did an even better job working, a bunch of us working together to really get that down. And then I've also been writing. I'm writing a mini series for Marvel for a character called Sabretooth from the X-Men, and there too, it's been. All this knowledge has helped so that the conversations there have been less about like the turns and more about like, okay, you also have a data page, and where's that data page going to land so it has the greatest effect? And also we have ads, so you need to think about the ads and where they'll be. And so that's its own sort of like education.
And when you're working on a Marvel comic, I mean, my understanding is they don't know where the ads are going to fall.
The nice thing is, at least in the X office right now, they do have a general idea. Like basically, like if you want to, like some of the folks who are much more savvy, who've been there longer, Vita Ayala, Cy Spurrier, Kieran Gillen, Jerry Duggan, those folks who've been doing it a long time, Ben Percy, Leah Williams, like it's just a ton of folks, Tini Howard, they've all been doing it a long time. So they can even play with, like you might find out, oh, the ad is actually going to be on this page, and they can come in and be like, okay, here's the shift, just do this to work. But they do have a template. They're basically like, if you don't want to take any risks, we can almost guarantee you this will be the layout, including ads and title pages and all the rest, as long as you're okay with it just being the conventional breaks. And I have, certainly on this first mini, I've been like, give me every conventional break that you can, so I can just get this rhythm down to start working on, including the advertising.
Because the structure on working on a Marvel superhero is different than the structure of doing something like this, isn't it?
Well, certainly number one, there's no history. Nobody can tell me like in Eve, in an issue of Eve published in 1982, it was proven that Colossus is a vegetarian. So you have ruined this miniseries by showing him eat chicken. Like nobody can do that to me. And so there's a great deal less anxiety about that. In fact, like I made a snafu in my second issue of Sabretooth that some readers were very, very willing to tell me that I had made. And it's, and luckily it was a small enough thing that I don't think it didn't make any big issues for the story. But it was that kind of thing where it's like, you are not the owner of this car. You are borrowing this car. And I would even say, I know it's, of course, these are Marvel properties or DC properties, but I would suggest Marvel and DC aren't even the owners of these vehicles. The readers are the owners of those vehicles, and they love those vehicles dearly.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so so the feeling is to sort of say, like, I want to get in this. I really think you'll have a blast with where I want to drive the car.
Mhm.
But at the end of all this, I'm going to leave the keys in the car.
Yeah.
I'm going to say, thanks very much for letting me drive it. I can't wait to see where the next driver takes it.
Right.
Like, it's not mine.
Yeah.
And in a way, there's kind of a glory, the joy. There's some anxiety about that because you don't want to mess things up in a way that sort of destroys a character or something. But the joy of that is to say, like, I got to drive a car that Chris Claremont,
Yeah.
built, right? But I mean, I got to get in this driver's seat after him and after Grant Morrison.
Yeah.
And all these people who even tangentially touched on some of these characters and
Yeah.
made them and sprinkled them with their dust. Now I get to sprinkle mine in as well. And the beauty, and then in the next 10 years, a dozen other people will do the same.
Yeah.
And like, what a gift that you got to drive the car for a while.
Yeah. Was it more intimidating to do that than it was to say write Hellraiser, which has some of the same issue, some of it.
Right. But not as, I think, number one, I wrote about a demon who almost literally no one, even the people there dealing with the Hellraiser, almost didn't remember that was a demon from this universe. So there was a way that I went so deep cut,
right,
that it kind of, I had free reign. Like, nobody had ever written this character before.
Yeah.
Except for it. So at the end, not that anyone would care or remember, but at the end of the first Hellraiser movie, there's this homeless looking character who you discover at the end is actually a demon that, like, always finds the box after it's done all its damage and flies away. And as far as I knew, he hasn't been in anything else. And so I was like, can I write about that character?
Yeah.
They were like, sure. Because nobody else will, more than likely. And so, I mean, if I had written Pinhead or even any of the Cenobites,
right,
I think that would have been the same issue.
Yeah.
But because I was going so deep cut, I was kind of safe. And in a way, even my Sabretooth story, like, at the heart of it was, like, one of the things that we all agreed at the start was, I was not going to be using any A-listers except in, like, a tangential way. And so that also allows a great deal more freedom for these people to do lots of different things. I mean, as long as Sabretooth is an awful human being,
right,
and I can do almost anything with him.
Yeah.
Whereas I think if I was taking on, if somehow I was writing the X-Men, that's a very different issue.
Sure.
And I would feel so much more fraught about, how you play with those toys.
Yeah.
Versus, like, Sabretooth or.
Yeah. Did you hear from Clive about the Hellraiser story at all?
Never. No, I mean, never about that. Never directly at all. Yeah. As was his.
Only because he recommended you for the gig. That's the only reson why I asked. Yeah.
No. Believe me, I would have. It would have brought me no small amount of joy if I had. More like the way I heard was, I understood he was pleased because then he had another book of his called The Great and Secret Show that was being put out in, like, a special edition. And then through somebody, he reached out to me and said, I like what you, he didn't say I like what you did there necessarily. He said, I wonder if you'd be interested in writing an introduction to this.
Oh, nice.
Right. And so I took that as a sign that I hadn't messed it up completely.
That sounds great. I'm told that we have a question. Yes, Ben? Yes? All right. We're going to ask a question. From Pudrigo. Do you tailor your stories for comics based on your collaborator's artistic style?
Well, so far, I've come up with the story before I had a collaborator. So, no. But what has happened is, as we're going through issue to issue, I start to get a sense of their style. And I'll also sometimes just write to the artist who I'm working with, and I'll say, "Is there anything you would really love to draw in
Mm-hmm.
this world? Anything that I've written here that doesn't sound very interesting to draw, like it's kind of pedestrian? If you can think of something better, please do it, and then I'll adjust the dialogue or the captions
Yeah.
to what you did."
Yeah.
And so, in that way, I hope it feels more organic, so that the artist doesn't feel like, oh, I'm just following orders. I do want it to very much be an organic sort of thing, because in the end, like, I'm very proud of the writing, I'm very proud of the prose, but I know, like, I can read if a comic has great words but terrible art, I don't know if I could read it. But if a
Mm-hmm.
comic has awful words but amazing art, I'm still buying that comic.
Mm-hmm.
So I know where I have a great deal of respect for what the heart of this medium is.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I want I want the person making that work to feel like they got to floor to sort of to shine. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes sense. Um, uh, what's your physical process in writing? Do you are you writing it sort of screenplay style script? Are you writing, just sort of a plot synopsis? Do you do your own thumbnails to see how something flows on a page?
No, so it looks much more like a screenplay,
Mm-hmm.
except that it's I break it down panel to panel as opposed to page. I wish I had even enough skill to draw a square that I could draw something in to imagine it. So it's entirely like I I'll write out the script. Usually, what will happen is I'll write out the script, and then I'll read through it page to page. And in the first draft of the script, the action is either barely there or kind of dull, and
Right.
can be, two people standing together on an island, on the island of Krakoa, uh, yelling at each other. And then in the second draft, when I'm reading through, is when I'll be like, well, one of these people can fly and the other one can turn into mist. I should use that
Yeah.
in some way, like they should argue in the middle, they should argue in the air, and the mist character should float into the flying character's nostrils or something. I don't know. I need
Right.
to use this.
Right.
So it's usually like 2 or 3 drafts of the script before I send it to the editors. Then they usually have at least a few notes about, like, could you tighten this up? Could you do this? We were wondering if this might be more dynamic of a way to deal with this issue here on this page, or whatever it might be. Then I'll do that fourth pass, and then that's usually the one that gets sent to the artist.
Yeah.
And then sometimes, like, so with the Sabretooth one, I've been working with an amazing artist named Leonard Kirk. And what's fun there is he'll sometimes, when he sends back the art, he'll say, I saw, like, reading it, I saw you had 6 panels, but I saw how to collapse it into 4 so that I could make one of them a lot bigger and really get into the detail and
Mm-hmm.
the beauty.
Mm-hmm.
And so now all you have to do is just adjust the dialogue. And, like, that's like a level of expertise that I just love.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
No, absolutely. Were you in touch with Joe at all in
Only
this?
through editorial. We weren't in direct contact. I think in part, like, she was just super busy, but also I think to some degree, language wise, there was a little bit of it would just seem like it would be easier and maybe translate a little better
Right.
through the editors who've been already working with her for a while.
Yeah.
So we had, I think, like, a tiny bit of exchange, but mostly it's just come through. Like, I send it to Boom,
Yeah.
we do our editorial passes and revisions. They send it to her.
Yeah.
She does her work. Then they send her work to me. I look through and say, like, could we adjust this? Could we do this? She makes some changes there, and then they send it to colorer, the
Yeah.
inker,
Yeah.
and so forth. Colorist.
Yeah. We were trying to get Joe to do this interview as well.
Yeah.
Get both of you to do it,
Yeah.
but was not interested.
I think
I think because of the language issue. I think.
I think
Yeah.
that's right. I think that's
Yeah.
right. So,
Yeah. It happens. I'm curious, particularly about Eve, in this sense that it seems to me that an awful lot of the success of a book like this comes down to character design, world design, um, things that you can describe in prose, but how they actually get executed makes kind of the critical difference.
for sure. And so the preliminary phase was a good bit um, of back and forth about a couple things. Like, so as far as the world goes, right? So the initial description I had was just like it's a post-apocalyptic da 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 da.
Mm-hmm.
And so Joe sends back her first pass, and it's like let's say it's like a diner, like a diner, you know, the counter at a diner and the stools and everything is sort of covered in like kudzu and growth and all the rest. And then I wrote back. I write back and I say like, well, the sort of the plague in this one makes people ravenous, so there wouldn't be any plant life.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, and there wouldn't be any plastic on the stools,
Mm-hmm.
and even the glass and some of the wood will have been devoured. And so then she sends back another version of that same thing, where everything is stripped except for metal or thick wood.
Yeah.
And it all looks much more skeletal and sort of like more like bones that have been bleached in the sun.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And then I was like, okay, yeah, that's it. So then it was just basically like it's going to be either everything is stripped down to nothing or it's water, right? Like that's all we have. And so, and then the same with Eve. We went through a few passes for Eve. Trying to get her hair right, skin tone right, get her features right. And that was, I think, thankfully, everybody worked together very nicely to, like, I supplied pictures and pictures and pictures of, like, here's what her hair should look like, here's what her skin should look like, here's what her features should look like.
Yeah.
And Joe came back with stuff, and then I didn't, and then Joe was the one who came up with her general, like, costuming. Right,
Yeah.
the way that she looks like a real like ready for anything adventurous kid, but not in like high end gear. You know, everything looks kind of stitched together and like she's
Right.
is almost falling apart. And in that, because I wanted the one of the sort of examples I gave her for like the energy of Eve was Pippi Longstocking.
Mm.
In that sense of like this kid who lives on her own, but in fact she's the most formidable kid you ever met. And so that went back and forth a few times, and then when we finally got it all together, it really felt like, okay, yeah, like this is her. And then and then Wexler, she came up with Wexler, particularly as a teddy bear, like she got him right away. And then we worked a little bit on him once he became a machine of death.
Yeah.
Right. Like, what should that look like? So that it doesn't look, so it looks hopefully scary and not just kind of goofy.
Yeah.
You know, and so that was the process. It was like a nice back and forth. But we did a lot of that before she even started drawing the first issue. And in that way, it made jumping through the next steps a lot easier.
Yeah. And I'm assuming that, like, you know, you can come up with Wexler in your head, but having someone actually draw it for you and go, this is what I think it looks like, probably changes the way you approach the character in the script, no?
Yes, although, you know, I will say the funny thing is the person who did the first sketch of Wexler was our oldest son.
Oh, okay.
Because he loves drawing essentially like machines of death.
Uh-huh.
Right? So he'll draw a scorpion, but it's got like 19 arms and they all have machine guns on them and things like that. So years ago, he drew a teddy bear that had like 6 arms. One is a missile, one is a hatchet, one is a this, one is a that. And I held on to that because I just loved the energy of that. Like that, it
Yeah.
would be like, it's very sweet, but it's a murder, it's a killer.
Yeah.
And so I did also send that picture to Joe. I mean, I scanned it and sent her the image as well to sort of say, like, obviously he didn't look like the teddy bear, but just to say, like, this is what's underneath it, like,
Yeah.
in there. And so he gave it first. Then when she sent it over, I was like, yeah, this is obviously, this is it, and a million times better. And then it allowed me to lean actually even more into the way he is kind of just a grumpy old cuss.
Yeah.
And that I got to enjoy leaning into that even more because she had done such a wonderful job of making him, in the beginning, I think, seem adorable.
Yeah.
And then it played, I thought it played nicely. It played even better against that.
Yeah.
Than
Yeah,
if
no,
he was West.
that tonal shift that comes is one of the things I most enjoyed about the story, actually. That as a reader, we think that the story is going to be one thing, and then it spins and becomes something else.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it certainly was. I felt like, I think this will be a real twist, and then by the end, I hoped, and it wouldn't turn out that it wasn't Alien,
Right.
like that we were going for. Although even that, it was like, for a minute when I was sort of like, oh, it's just going to be now like, the robot is just have to kill the humans. That's the way you go with this. Right. And then as we were getting to like issue 4, issue 5, and me and the editors were talking, we said, well, what if I wrote them and I said, what if Wexler had a good reason? And then they were like, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely do that. And so that it could be a second term, even if it's, when I say good reason, it's not a reason necessarily that people will agree with, but it's
a motivation, a logical motivation
yes.
You could understand. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Even if you don't agree, you understand. And so that was a lot of fun to sort of do that. And then, I was also, I guess, I wanted a post-apocalyptic story with a happy ending.
Yeah.
I felt like I was kind of in the mood for a happy ending.
Right.
For something in this world.
Yeah. No, believe me, I understand that. So what's the genesis of Eve? What came first for you? Was it Eve herself? Was it the world, the situation?
The genesis of Eve is actually my wife, and that my wife is also a writer. She writes fiction, but she also writes nonfiction. And in the last 10 years or so, she's been writing a lot about climate change. But she does it from the perspective, not from the up in space, here's everything that's going wrong around the world. She's doing it very much from the ground level, really on some levels, basically saying, like, to our shame, maybe we didn't take this all that seriously until we had our first child. And selfish, and understood how selfish it was that we couldn't have thought about this planet before we had a child. Now that child is here, like, what are the really, like, on the ground effects? So, like, our younger son has asthma, and it's absolutely directly linked to the neighborhood in which he was born and raised, because there's high rates of asthma for all the kids for a huge percentage of kids in Washington Heights, in New York. And then that led into sort of issues of climate change, environmental racism, things like that. And so she's been writing about this and publishing stuff in the New Yorker, the New York Review of Books, New York Magazine, all these wonderful places, Orion Magazine, other places like that. And as her husband and a fellow writer, I've been sort of like on her shoulder, listening to her talk about it,
Right.
reading the pieces when they come out, and all that stuff was percolating in my brain. And I knew I was never going to be as good a writer or as expert a writer as her on the nonfiction end. But I was learning these things and I was feeling this deep concern. And I thought the way I can sort of wrestle with it and talk about it is in a story. And in particular in a comic book. I would say, so our older child is on some level the spirit of Akai, the character in Destroyer. And so Eve is absolutely the spirit of our younger child. And so in a way it was like my wife's research and then our younger child who is it's a cliche, he's the pluckiest kid I ever met. And I was like, okay, even if I never publish another comic, each of you got one. And each of them is about how much I love you and how wonderful I think you are.
Yeah.
So
that's kind of sweet, actually.
Thank you. I mean, I really hope they would. I hope they will find it that way.
Yeah. Though your youngest is also you have two boys. You said yes.
Yeah, our youngest is trans, and
okay.
And so so he's a boy. And we discussed it, and he said it's okay for Eve to be a girl, because I also wanted a black boy and a black girl as in the two comics. And so so we discussed it. He said, that's cool. I'm going to write my own comics anyway. I don't need you to write about me. Nice. So that's why I said the pluckiest kid on earth. So yeah, he's so when the time comes, he'll pop out his own thing. But so that was why these were the two of them.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love that, actually. I really love that a lot. What to you is the appeal of monsters?
Oh, well, number one, they're just so fun, right? And two, they can mean they get to mean so much more than any literal an oil spill. I'm thinking back to the old Godzilla movies. And there's one movie, it's a terrible movie. It's Godzilla versus the Smog Monster. But I will say that I really wasn't thinking about smog and climate issues in the 80s, except for the Smog Monster. And there's a song at the beginning called Save the Earth. And then there's this creature that just ejects these disgusting blobs that kill people and all this other stuff. And as a kid, I think what I thought it was just like a gross monster, like if you made a monster out of boogers, right? Like it was fun and disgusting. But there was a way that some part of me was also like, oh, that's pollution. Got it. I see. But I didn't have to, but no one had to, I didn't have to sit down and be a kid being told, watch this movie about watch Silent Spring or something like that. A few years later, I read it and could enjoy it or appreciate it. But I feel like the gift of monsters is they can be the fantastical thing and they can be the symbolic thing simultaneously. And then the amazing thing is they can also be more than one symbol.
Yeah.
And so, I have a love of horror. There are so many iconic characters. Jason Voorhees is absolutely just a fun killer. But Jason Voorhees is also potentially, the specter, the rage of the ignored, child, and he's also from the first movie. He's also like the sort of the spirit of a mother's undying love, you know. But mostly he's just a cash cow for some producers, you know.
Sure.
He can be all of those things depending on who's playing with him.
Yeah.
And that's amazing, I think, you know. And then as a secondary note, like this is much more sort of overthinking it, but like one of the definitions of monster, like if you break it down into like some of its roots in Latin, I guess, is that the word monster means a message from the divine. And I really like that idea as well, as like that monsters are a way that we channel into something much more profound than us. Whatever you want to call it, divine, fate, God, whatever, it can be any of that. But it's just that sense that like something from the world, from the cosmos, whatever, is trying to tell you something. And it has sent this strange being to make it known to you. And so I love monsters without reservation.
I love that answer. I think that's a great answer, man. This is kind of a weird question. The Destroyer was published as Victor LaValle's Destroyer.
It was, yes.
It had your name above the title, which I thought was an interesting choice, given that you weren't really known in the comic circles at all.
Yeah.
Was that a decision made by Boom or made by you, or?
No, so what happened was there's already a Destroyer. In the Thor comics, there's the Destroyer character. There was, I think Destroyer's common enough that there might have been other comic books with that. So they came back and they said, we want just to sort of like avoid any copyright issues and to make it stand out from maybe other things. And I think even Nicole Kidman had a movie out around that time called Destroyer. They said, like, we think you need to change the title. But I was really, for whatever reason, like being inspired by dreams or something like that, I felt like Destroyer is the title. And then I said, let me take a page out of my man John Carpenter's book. And his movies are all John Carpenter's The Thing, John Carpenter's Halloween. Maybe not Halloween, but all the later ones.
Yeah.
And so I said, well, what do you think about Victor LaValle's Destroyer? And they were like, it's kind of arrogant, but okay, let's do it. You know? And I said, I'm okay with that.
Well, I'm glad you said it, because that's what I was thinking too. It's a little arrogant there.
There's a little bit of hubris there, but like the beauty of it was, it like if that, so that's why like it's not Victor LaValle's Eve, it's just Eve, because for whatever reason there wasn't an Eve that would bring up those copyright issues or anything like that, and so I didn't continue the pattern. But in that case, I to this day I don't know if I could explain why. I just felt so sure it had to be called Destroyer.
Okay.
And I said, okay, this is how I do it, and it is also true. And I was also like, hey, look, nobody might this might be read by nobody. I'm at least putting my name on the cover,
right,
in some sort of way. But it absolutely, I can see how it smacks of like, who's Destroyer?
Yeah. Well, for me as a retailer too, it's always like trying to figure out, what do you rack it as? Do you rack it under V or do you rack it under D? Right? Because those are, because on my invoice it certainly shows up in the V's. Right?
Right.
Gotcha.
But I would think you should put it in the D's, right? Because
yes, no, we did end up racking it in the D's because it just seemed because we didn't want to give in to your arrogance.
That's fair, but also I would say like the other thing is like a different, like a famous comic writer's name at the top would make sense. Then you rack it there because that person's name might, I could see like who would be, I don't know, Alan Moore's Barbie.
Yeah,
absolutely is going under A. Right.
Yeah. Again, I generally would say don't do that to almost any author. to put your name above the title. Now, you can put your name physically above the title. Your name is physically above the word E, but it's not part of the title here.
Part of the title,
You know,
right.
That to me is the difference, right?
You know, I always loved, this is like a totally different thing, but there was a movie that came out, it must be over a decade now, called, good Lord, how am I, Push, I think it was, it was called, give me one second, I apologize for looking up for a second, because
No, it's all good. If it helps you make the argument better, that's all good.
Yes, that's what it was. So there was a movie 10 years ago called Precious, right? That was by a writer named Lee Daniels, became a big sensation at the time, won an Oscar for Monique, I believe. Like amazing and all this stuff. And but the writer of the book was a poet and fiction writer named Sapphire, really lovely person. And the book had been, I think, a hit, but not, retire kind of money. And so when they optioned the book, they told her, like, we're going to change the name because Push doesn't tell anybody anything, right? But Precious does, and there's a nice planet because she's not treated in any way like she's precious, blah, 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 blah. And Sapphire said, I hear you, but what I want the official title of this movie to be is Precious, a movie based on the book Push by Sapphire. Her whole point was like, even a movie that no one sees is going to be seen by 1 million times more people than even my hit book. And she said, like, just pushing for that as she said, like, the producers or whatever were like, it's gonna be called what? And she said, I'm not selling it to you without that. And they weren't paying her a ton of money, I don't think. So it's just sort of like, all right, fine. But she, like, I don't want to say she retired of that because I don't know her finances, but she sold a lot more books as a result. This is not the same thing. Obviously, because I wasn't whatever. But this is all to say that there's a fun, and I think there's a fun and interesting blend of like crassness and arrogance that goes into the process. You know what I mean? And I just leaned into it. Yeah.
No, it's all good. I just, I thought as long as I was talking to you, we may as well talk about it for a minute. In terms of Eve, the first association that anybody's going to have with the name Eve, I think, is going to be the biblical one. How did you name Eve, I guess, is my question, and what were your thoughts there?
Well, it was, in a way, it was similar to Destroyer. Like the name came to me before anything else, and then I spent a while trying to convince myself not to use that name for exactly that reason, because it was sort of like, oh my God, could you pick a more on the nose title than Eve?
Right.
Like, why don't you call it like Eve and the Garden of Eden? Why don't you, you know what I mean? Like, just go all the way kind of thing. But it wouldn't leave me. And there was a part of me that also started to say, okay, so what if it's on the nose? Like, and sometimes it's like, okay, if they think of that thing and then they open the comic and pretty quickly see, well, it's not in any way a literal sort of retelling, or there's no obvious, it's not even like an obvious sort of like Christian allegory, anything like that, then it will wash away a little bit of that fear. But you can't don't overlook the astounding amount of essentially free advertising that the name Eve has done in human beings' minds.
Sure.
And so it was sort of like, don't overthink it. You, like, everything else about this, I think, is relatively specific and weird, and I wasn't sure if it would go over with people. Like the particular type of climate change, the clone stuff, the killer AI teddy bear, blah blah blah. Blah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I was like, I don't know if any of this other stuff is going to be. People are just going to be like, this is stupid. So let me use one thing that people will recognize.
Right.
And so then I just said, okay, I'm just going to stick with it.
Yeah. It's funny because it's all the other stuff that I like the most about the book.
Right. Well, like that was certainly my hope, but I felt like I want you to open it,
Mm-hmm.
and Eve, certainly I know also there'd be some people would be like, Eve pass, like
Mm-hmm.
no question. But
Mm-hmm.
I bandied around some other names, but honestly, they were like, Clone 6 and the Bear Companion.
Right.
Terrible
Right. Right.
titles. And
Right.
so I just went simpler, on the nose, fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it absolutely worked. It absolutely worked. And as I said, I thought this was it was a really smart book. It was a really kind of touching book, and it took turns, and I don't know. I really, really like this, man. That's what I can say to you. I think you did a fantastic job on this.
I
And
really, really appreciate that.
and the other thing that I just sort of want to point out is this has been selling really well for us, like outside of the club, right? Like people have really reacted to this book and that image very
Isn't it
strongly.
amazing cover? Amazing cover.
It really is an amazing cover. And, I think that particularly now, I think people are really looking for, diversity in protagonists and situations. And I think you hit at a really good moment for that. That the book becomes that much more attractive as a result.
I think, yeah, I mean, I think it's that kind of thing. Like even 5 years earlier, there's not maybe the same appetite, or not maybe the same conversation about that appetite.
Yeah.
And so I do feel also very lucky that this is the time, and also like even Destroyer, there too, there was conversation about like it's a good time for it and all this kind of stuff, and good to see a protagonist like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say, one of the things that played a factor in how I wrote Eve was also, I thought it came to a happy end, but it's a much grimmer book, and a much grimmer, like maybe at the very end there's a flourish of something.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's at least smiling on the last page.
Right.
But I also felt like, maybe at the time when that came out, it was full of like kind of despair and anguish and anger. So that was the right energy for it.
Mm-hmm.
But like this time around, it also felt like I want Eve to give if a reader gets into it, I want her to give them something different, which is like you close that book and you say like, all right, let's keep going. Let's keep fighting. Let's try for this, and I wonder if that too, like the kind of kid Eve is, the moment that we're in, and that it's frankly like just not a unbelievable downer of a book, also helps. Like I said before, like I was dying for something hopeful.
Yeah. Well, especially in like, post-apocalyptic space, they just tend to be darkety dark all of the time.
Yes.
Like let's make it worse and let's pile on, and so the fact that it does have some hope and some light at the end of it is kind of beautiful. No, I really, like I said, I really like this. Let's start to wrap up. I got two, like, just like I have an initial question I always ask. I have two questions I always put at the end.
Okay.
The first one is kind of for you. What else do you have coming up? Are there things you would like to plug? You as an author, give me 5 minutes of what's next.
Well, so I've turned in. Joe is at work on issue 1 of the next Eve story. So we just had so much fun doing it, and frankly, people seem to like the story and like these folks. I felt like I had more story to tell. Like there was, like you saved the world, and then what? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and rather than it being a story of, rather than going backwards and saying, let's tell the past, I said, like,
Yeah.
no, it's really like happily ever after. And then the next day they woke up and there was some stuff they had to do.
Mm-hmm.
And what did the world look like? And da-da-da. So that'll be, excuse me, I think as long as we stay on schedule, like late fall of this year,
Nice. Wow.
the next Eve story.
Uh-huh.
So that's
That
I feel
genuinely
really,
excites me, man. That I'm
oh
I'm
good.
actually that this is a scoop and I love it. I think that's fantastic, man. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
good, good. I'm glad that's the reaction
Yeah.
to that, and so
Yeah.
that's probably the most fun, like uh, comic end thing,
Yeah.
and then also
And 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 how do you see it? How do you see it for the longer term? I mean, is it do you have one more story? Do you think you might have five more stories?
at least two more.
Nice.
At least two more. And I
Nice.
think as a yeah, I mean, because I just am enjoying the world. We're gonna like build it out a little bit so that uh, we're gonna bring in like Eve and her clone and the teddy bear. They were on a certain adventure, but there were a lot of kids living through some real bad times,
Mhm.
and what are they going to be like?
Mhm.
Just because the air is clean and you can step outside, does that mean everybody's ready
Mhm.
for a saved world?
Right.
It's the kind of thing I wanted to sort of play with, um, and um, and at least for now, we've talked, and there's at least two more arcs of story that I can see
Nice.
wanting to really dive into with her, with all of them, and with a
Yeah.
sort of expanding cast of this new world. You
Oh, that's
know,
fantastic. I love that.
Oh, good. I'm glad. I'm really
Yeah.
glad.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so that's a big, and then maybe on the non uh, comic side of things, I published a book in 2017, a novel called The Changeling, and next in 2 weeks we start filming the show for Apple TV.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so
Congratulations.
thanks. So we're in pre-production now. I'm
Uh-huh.
a part of the process, and we've got most of our cast. We're building sets. We're doing all this real cool stuff, and
Mhm.
then in May we start filming the pilot, and we'll film through the summer. And I think the hope would be that in the fall, maybe, or spring of 2023, it'll air on Apple TV.
Nice.
So
Nice. That's
so
great.
exciting stuff! Exciting
Yeah.
stuff. I hope.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's pretty exciting. I mean, it seems to me that Eve could very well be a show as well,
Yes,
you
I
know.
agree. I
Yeah.
agree. And there's some movement in that direction, but of like with all these things, until
Yeah.
it exists, it doesn't
Exactly.
exist.
Exactly.
But I would
Exactly.
love that. I would love for that, and I would love for the chance for that story to be told in another medium as well.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Well,
So
that's cool, man. Good. Good. I'm glad that there's more coming. That is great stuff.
I'm really happy.
So and then the last question, and maybe this one might really be easy for you to answer. I don't know, or maybe it's hard. Um, this is a series of videos that we do where we talk to a lot of different people, and so it ends up getting watched by people who want to make comics on their own.
Okay.
And what I often hear from people is, yeah, I want to do comics. I don't know how to start. I don't know how to begin to start writing
Yeah.
or creating. So as the final question, if someone came to you and was like, I don't know how to start, what would your advice be? And it can be something physical, it can be something sort of spiritual or emotional, or I'll just shut up now and let you kind of answer that how you want to.
Well, I'm like in many ways a very, very practical person, and so I think that the thing that I would suggest, I believe very much in finding models for the thing you want to do, so you can understand how it was done. And so I would say, only example I can think of this off the top of my head is Alan Moore. They published and I think it was Eddie Campbell, right, who did the art. They did a From Hell that included his scripts in the back. And I found it revelatory, number one, to see how much he wrote in his descriptions, but just to see a script, you know. And so I would say if you're talking to comic book writers, these days I wouldn't be, well, maybe I would be semi-surprised, but the internet being what it is, I bet it's possible to find comic book scripts, at least for some classic comics, like the big stuff. Sure. You know, maybe some Grant Morrison runs or some Alan Moore runs or whoever, you know, is big to that person, to that writer, and to study them and to just read 2, 3, 10, 15 of those scripts and really start to really understand how greats in the form did it. And then the point is not to necessarily do it as well as them right out the gate, but just to understand, like, literally what the format looks like, what kind of work goes into it. And then actually I would say this is a secondary thing. The best version of this would be, if it's possible, I don't know if it is, like, I tell my writing students this sometimes, if they have a writer they love and there's a masterpiece of theirs that they love, right? Let's say if it's Virginia Woolf and they love To the Lighthouse or Mrs. Dalloway or something like that. And what I'll say to them is, and did you read her first novel, Voyage to the Sea? Because it's nothing like the other books. It's clearly the work of a talented first-timer. And there's something beautiful and maybe anxiety reducing about seeing that even the greatest writer you love did not write masterpieces out the gate.
Yeah.
Right. Or occasionally there's the occasional one who does write a masterpiece out the gate. And then I'll say, well, look at their later ones. Were they masterpieces? And almost without fail, no. Yeah. Right? Like they knocked it out early and then it didn't. But to say, like, if you can, to read scripts and then read scripts, if possible, of writers you love at different stages, to see how they grew, how they matured, but also where they began, so you would take some pressure off yourself.
Yeah.
In thinking you have to write From Hell first or something.
Yeah,
like that.
Yeah. It's interesting because that totally makes me think of the first thing that pops in my head with that example is Bill Sienkiewicz. How Bill Sienkiewicz, you know, when he was drawing Moon Knight, was a Neil Adams clone. I mean, he was literally aping Neil Adams and trying to be Neil Adams and draw like Neil Adams. And then when he did Elektra, you know, he's like, okay, now I'm gonna be me, you know. And having learned all that foundational stuff by studying a past master, he was then able to, you know, to go beyond that and become this amazing expressionistic artist, you know.
And I love that example also because another thing that I know I felt when I was a newer writer, and then I think a lot of newer writers sometimes feel, is I can't copy. And I always try to say, like, of course you can copy. You can't plagiarize, but of course you can copy, which is just called being influenced.
Yeah.
And that if you copy well enough at a certain point, exactly to that point, you learn those fundamentals. And then some part of you says, like, well, I notice a few things that I wish they would have done differently. And you say, like, oh, that's you beginning to find you.
Yeah.
And then you follow that path. So copy the people you love, read the people you love, and then write stuff that people will love.
Yeah. I love it. I really want to thank you, Victor, for taking the time to talk to us tonight. I really want to thank you for this book. It was really a fantastic piece of comicking, and I'm so glad there's going to be more.
Brian, thank you for that. So thank you for this tonight. Thank you for making this book a part of the book club. I'm really honored by that. Yeah. And this has been such a fun conversation.
I try. I like talking about comics. What can I say? I like talking about creativity. Talking about creativity thrills me. You know. So thank you. Ben, will you put me on a 1, please? Thank you. So I want to thank. I've already thanked Victor. I want to thank Ben for running the show. I want to thank Jordan for being the producer. I want to thank my staff. I want to thank Zoe, Kat, and Katie for allowing me to do this, because they run the store and I get to fool around and talk to authors, which is really great. I want to thank all of you for watching. I want to thank everybody who's a member of the club, because we couldn't do it without you, literally. And again, I want to thank people like Victor who make comics, because we wouldn't have a show if it wasn't for that. In the quick things coming up, the next couple of shows, our Classics Club, we are doing the Fabulous Furry Freak Brothers. We've got Paul Mervides. This is actually going to be a live show in a live studio audience, and we're even doing it on 420, which I just think is right. Next month's Kids Club is Squire by two new authors. Sarah, I'm going to ruin this, Alpha Gia, I think, and Nadia Shamas. And this is a fantastic, nice, thick book for kids. And then next month's new adult book will be Nice House on the Lake by James Tinian. Tinian will be here as well in person, and we will be sitting across from each other and talking with a live studio audience. I'm excited by these things, and so I hope that you will join us again. And again, I want to, for the last time, thank you, Victor, for being a part of this, and thank you for spending the time with us tonight.
That was a gift, truly. Thank you, Brian.
Righteous, my friend. Okay, well, we'll see you all next show or next month, and thanks. Have a wonderful night, everybody. Thank you for watching this episode of the Graphic Novel of the Month Club. If you enjoyed what you were watching, please subscribe and hit that bell up in the top corner. If you enjoyed the books that we're talking about and the creators that we're talking to, every month we pick a brand new book. The staff votes on it. It's a program that helps keep our store alive, and we'd love to have you as a member. You'll get a new book every month. Just follow that URL at the bottom of the screen.